As we've discussed at the beginning of this series of Shirim, the story that underlies the first teaching of Likutei Moharan involves a person that asked Rabbi Nachman for advice about their Torah learning, and contained within the first few words, if they're really unpacked thoroughly, of Likutei Moharan, is a sort of wondrous piece of advice, which is that if they set their intentions to have a certain emotion, a certain attitude to their learning, this is going to cause them to get a lot more out of the actual information that they get from the book. They understood the information before, but it wasn't lighting them up. Asri tamimi darech hahoylechim b'toras Hashem. Happy are those, lit up are those who are on the path of the Torah, and we unpacked commentaries in the word Torah that there are 12 words, 12 emotions one can have, 12 attitudes toward the learning. But in order for one to apply this advice, one has to first be able to have any sort of emotion at all. It's written here in our book Hakdama. Rabbi Nachman included in his answer that one must learn with rigor. What sort of rigor? You have to make an effort to have some emotion. Why does it take effort to have an emotion? It doesn't seem to take effort to have an emotion. There's lots of times we get an emotion we don't even want to. Someone cuts me off in traffic. Although being upset doesn't actually help the situation, it's not a useful emotion. It isn't the emotion that I would choose for myself. I should probably just stay calm and drive safely. Nevertheless, with no effort at all on my part, this emotion arises. And yet we find that when we sit down to learn a book and we try to make ourselves feel a certain way about the book beforehand, I guess with no external cause for that feeling, it's not so easy. This is easily observable. But what's really the difference here? Why is it hard to have an emotion that I want to have when it's so easy to have an emotion that I didn't choose to have? So on the subject of where we get our emotional energy from, Rabbi Nachman includes the famous passage from the Zohar in the first teaching of Likutei Moharan, which says that Halavana ein lo oyer me'atzma ki ima shemekabelas me'hashemesh, that the moon doesn't have any light of its own, but for what it receives from the sun. So to say that if we just understand this on a superficial level, that we can only get emotions from outside. So there must be some way to connect with the sun that we can do so sort of at our own command. So included in our special edition of Likutei Moharan is an extended passage from the Zohar that discusses this subject further. It says like this: Es hamayir gadol razeh asirin, ve'es hamayir katan razeh maskinin. The way that the sun and the moon are described in the works of creation as the great light and the small light, the Zohar compares to a rich person and a poor person. Just like the moon doesn't have anything of its own, so it has to borrow from the sun. The Shekhinah, which is really actually a manifestation of God, it's the lowest, so to speak, most accessible, most experienceable level of godliness that is realizable from the physical world. And it says, loan to me and I shall return, I shall make good on the loan. So why does the Shekhinah need a loan if it's a part of God? And so the advice of the Zohar is that we have to be as though we're a lender to a poor person with regard to this level of godliness. What is this level of godliness that it's asking for a loan? So the Shekhinah corresponds to the attribute of Malchus, which if you have a bunch of different attributes, you have an attribute that's responsible for mercy, and one that's responsible for anger, and one that's responsible for wisdom, and one for calculating sort of understanding, and all these different attributes. What is the lowest attribute? It doesn't have an attribute. It's the ability to receive any sort of attribute at all, which means already it doesn't have one. There's an open space available for an attribute. And so we have to give it an attribute. And when we give it an attribute, it will give us an attribute back, and therefore we will feel the emotion by running our emotional energy through the Shekhinah, so to speak. Because just like the Shekhinah doesn't have anything of its own, we don't seem to have anything of our own emotionally. It's very difficult to generate our own emotion. So, sort of a precedent emotionally is to consider that there is this manifestation of godliness in the room with us. It's here all the time, called the Shekhinah. And it's asking us to give it something of us, to give it some sort of emotional energy. And by doing so, then we can draw from a higher source into the Shekhinah, and now there's actually sort of an emotion in the room. But perhaps the reason why it's so hard to consciously generate an emotion within ourselves, that we're just feeling, not acting as though we're on a stage and causing tears but we don't actually feel upset, or they're not actual tears of joy, they're just tears because they have the trick to make my eyes water or something, but actually consciously feeling this emotion all the way, is to consider that we're giving the emotion to someone else. It's a little bit like, it's easy to be lazy about taking care of ourselves, but when we have to take care of someone else, we put a little bit more effort in. We make sure that we're doing it properly. So when we consider that the Shekhinah here is in the room, and I don't have to make myself feel that I am going to feel a sense of wonder about the Torah I'm about to learn. I don't necessarily have to feel that way. All I have to do is say to the Shekhinah, oh, this is going to be amazing. I just have to convince the Shekhinah to feel amazed. And the Shekhinah says, if you loan to me, I will give back. And then if we can convince God on some level to be amazed, then we too shall feel amazed.